So now we can go to the main thing, which is story night, inshallah. So this week we're going to be learning about the story of Uthman Ibn Affan, radiallahu anhu, and we have Ustadh Nasir Ishfaq with us, and I'm sure he's been waiting a long time because there've been so many announcements, and I think there's enough people by now. I'll hand it over to Ustadh.
First of all, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for inviting me and for Isa for dragging me along. I actually gave a more detailed talk than what I'm going to do tonight at the Heritage Centre some time ago. So you can go over to BMHC's Facebook page or the Affirming Foundation's Facebook page and just search Uthman, and you'll find sort of an hour-long lecture I did there, and I went through like key parts of his life, especially Khilafah. But when I was speaking to Isa about this talk, the intention was more to for students to take benefit from his life. So I think what I'll do is I'll spend more time sort of going into some detail and giving some context to the decisions he made, the choices he made, and how they affected his life, both in this life and inshallah in the hereafter as well. So first and foremost, his full name is Abu Abdullah Uthman Ibn Affan Ibn Abi al-As Ibn Umayyah Ibn Abd al-Shams Ibn Abd al-Manaf. So a few things to pick out there. Some of you will be familiar with what's known as a kunya. A kunya is, I think in English it's called nomenclature. It's basically like a name after a child, or if you don't have a child, they'll give you another title like Abu Abdullah, and it's how people will refer to you. So in Arab society at that time, people would not call you by your first name. So you wouldn't say Nasir, you would refer to me by Abu Abdullah if you didn't know my kunya, or you might refer to me by my eldest child. And people would take all sorts of things as their kunya. And so actually Abu Abdullah, at the time it was given to him, he didn't actually have a child. And some say it was actually given after his wife Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, gave birth to a son, and some say his name was Abdullah, and some say his name was Abdul Rahman. And Allahu A'lam, it seems that actually the kunya was given to him as Abu Abdullah in the anticipation that he would have a child. And actually before he was married, his kunya was Abu Amr. And there's a lot of people you'll find these days that take a kunya. It's interesting, you find a lot of Pakistanis taking kunyas. I just find it hilarious that they didn't be interested in it. It's not like an Islamic culture per se, although a lot of Muslims do it, and you'll find Muslims from all over that will take a kunya. There's nothing Mubarak about it. There's nothing inherently Islamic about taking a kunya. It was more a custom of the Arabs at the time that they would do that. And Allah, if somebody wants to take a kunya, then that's fine. The other interesting things that you'll note is in his lineage is Umayyah, and I think these series of talks will go on to speak about those from the Umayyad dynasty, and that dynasty of the Umayyads, that after Uthman ibn Affan, after he was killed, you then had Ali and Muawiyah radiallahu anhuma, who were both basically vying to be the Khalifa. In some respects, Muawiyah became the next king, you could say, or leader, and his son Yazid after him. And that was basically the start of the Umayyad dynasty. And this is a collection of leaders that essentially descend from Umayyah, going back to the ancestors of Uthman ibn Affan, radiallahu anhu. His mother, her name was Arwa bint Qurayza ibn Rabi'a ibn Habib ibn Abd al-Shams. And actually, Uthman ibn Affan's father, his lineage also goes back to Abd al-Shams. So they are actually cousins. I don't think it was first cousins, but they were related. And this also, maybe, don't think it's related to your speed dating program, but actually at that time it was very common for people to marry to their cousins. And I know today it's a cultural thing. There's all sorts of semi-science built around it, whether you marry your cousin or you don't. But at that time, it was very common that people would marry their cousins, and there's no harm in that, inshallah. He actually became Muslim upon the hands of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and this was before the Prophet started meeting in Dar al-Arqam. So just put some context to that. As the Prophet ﷺ received the wahi, obviously he came back and spoke to his wife, and some believe that she became Muslim at that point, which seems to be most clearest. And then after this, he went and he told Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq accepted Islam straight away, no questions asked. And then Abu Bakr as-Siddiq actually went and told some of his close friends and companions, and amongst them was Uthman Ibn Affan. And now, one thing you should know is that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was not from the most noble of Quraysh, but he was from the noble families. And certainly Uthman Ibn Affan was one of the noblemen of Quraysh. He was a young man from a noble family of Quraysh. And even though he came from a good background, from a wealthy family, from a stable parents and uncles and so on, he had no resistance in accepting Islam and accepting a new way of life, and accepting something different to his parents and what his uncles and aunties were all doing, knowing full well that this would be something that would upset them, it'd be something that they would challenge him on, and so on. And indeed, actually, after he became Muslim, his uncles were the ones that used to torture him. They would beat him up, and they would get palm leaves, and they would basically turn it into a mat, and they'd roll him up in it and tie him up in it, and then they'd basically have him suspended over fire. And then after a while, without wanting to kill him, they would then take him off and beat him even more. So Uthman ibn Affan was actually, you say, tortured for his Islam. And this again at the hands of his close uncles. And I think for us as young people, there's a really important lesson there, in that when you choose to practice your Islam, maybe you come from a family of practicing people, maybe you don't. Most of us will not come from a practicing family. But as soon as you decide to practice Islam and you want to wear a hat, you want to grow a beard, or a sister wants to wear hijab or anything like that, or even small things like, not going and doing the things you did before, maybe you felt they were questionable, you will start to find ridicule, you'll start to find people, pick on you, and maybe you even find quite strong resistance from family members. One thing you should know is that this is quite common, and it happened even to the earliest of Muslims. And I'm sure, inshallah, none of us are facing anything like what Uthman did, but you will find this aspect, and that is really Shaitan encouraging those around you to pull you away from what you're going to do. And also, sadly, at the hands of fellow Muslims, you'll find ridicule and people trying to put you down, or trying to mock you by virtuing. So, for example, say, "Oh, you're such a pious person. How come you're listening to music?" Or, "You're such a pious person. How come you're sat here with us having shisha?" Or something like that. And so they'll try to take one of your weaknesses and use it against you. Or, "You're such a pious person. Why are you doing this? Or why are you doing that?" Or wearing, silly things like wearing perfume or driving X car or something like that. And this is one of the tricks of Shaitan, to try and pull you away from the goodness that you're starting. Every Muslim, when they start practicing Islam, they start gradually, they take steps, they need time to move away from some of their previous habits and so on. And that's a natural part of the journey. And don't be disheartened by people that are close to you, whether it's your parents, brothers, sisters, your friends at the time, if they start to mock you or they become aggressive towards you. This is, understand that this is Shaitan trying to harm you through them and persuade you away from them. And also, if you see it at the hands of other Muslims, then this is, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that, do not aid Shaitan against your brother. Don't put your fellow Muslim down, which is sadly something that happens all over campuses and even outside of the university sphere. So I think it's a lesson we can take from Uthman ibn Affan, that even though he faced this punishment as a young man, it wasn't enough to stop him from practicing Islam and propagating his religion and sticking to his beliefs. And I think you yourselves will go through a similar process. So it's important to be ready for that, be aware of it. It doesn't make you any different to anyone else. And also, contextualize what small things you're going through compared to the major pains and difficulties that Sahaba went through, and also realize that, like, a lot of times when we talk about the Sahaba and the Prophets, we see them as the sort of the most virtuous people in the world, and as though they've always been at that standard, as though they were always in the sort of immortalized way that we speak about them. But really, the Sahaba anhum went through a journey. They struggled, they sacrificed, they were patient, and that's how they attained that stature, of being those who are promised paradise, or the example for the believers. It wasn't that it was just given to them, and that they're automatically like that. And inshallah, it's a sign for us that if we can also be patient in our struggles and difficulties, inshallah, we can be the ones that the Prophet used to cry about, and he would say, I'm looking forward to see my brothers. And the Sahaba asked, O Messenger of Allah, are we not your brothers? He said, no, you are my companions. My brothers are those who will come after me, and they will love me and follow me, although they never saw me. So inshallah, keep steadfast in what you're doing. Remember, you're doing it for yourself. You're not doing it for to make your parents happy or somebody else, or because people like what you're saying, or it gives you a position amongst a social group. Because if you're doing it for one of those things, very quickly it'll fade away. As soon as you lose interest, all of that will go. And the worst part is that when it comes to receiving a reward for the good that you've done, you'll find that actually it was just all for show and tell, and there's no actual reward for it. Instead, there's punishment. So us as practicing people, not that we tell this to somebody else, but say it to yourself that don't think you're doing anything special. Don't think you're saving the ummah by praying your tahajjud or something. This is for yourself, and really, who knows whether this is to your benefit or to your detriment. So seek Allah subhanahu mercy, and don't try to bat shaitan away from telling you that you're something special, that you've achieved a great status or something, and really use the stories of Sahaba to help tame your own nafs in that regard. So just moving on a little bit more about Uthman ibn Affan, I like to give a bit of a description of the Sahaba, and thankfully we have some nice descriptions of what Uthman ibn Affan used to look like. It's said that he was of medium build with large joints, and he had light brown skin, or soft white skin, and his skin was actually very soft, and they said that he was very beautiful and handsome, and that he had broad shoulders. And he had lots of hair on his head, obviously this when he was young, and lots of hair on his arms. So don't feel shy if your arms are nice and hairy. Very common for those from the Indian subcontinent. Uthman ibn Affan also had very hairy arms and head. And he also had a very large beard, and he had some yellow hairs in his beard, which is actually naturally occurring. And I have a good friend of mine who's like that. He has a very nice, beautiful, thick beard, and naturally he has some yellow orangey tinged hairs in his beard as well. And he had marks on his face from the traces of smallpox. So obviously smallpox has been around for a long time, and it said that Uthman ibn Affan was affected by it, and it left some traces on his face. Interestingly, when he became older, he actually lost his hair and he became bald, which also happened to Umar ibn Khattab. Some said it was from the effects of the famine that he persevered through and led the Muslims through in his Khilafah, and this took its toll on him, and actually he became bald. And it's said about Uthman ibn Affan, later in his life he got married, and his wife who he got married to had never seen him without his turban and so on as he is when he's outside. So when it came to the time in the evening, he removed his turban and his bald head was showing. And he said to his wife, I hope my baldness doesn't scare you. And she said, no, we see baldness of the head as a sign of strength and power in our men. So actually, it's interesting that he became bald later in life. And it's interesting as well, Ali ibn Abi Talib, when he heard about the Prophet saying that when you make ghusl, you have to ensure the water touches to the base roots of the hair, he said, I became the enemy of my head, meaning that he used to shave his head off, his hair off. So it's very common amongst the Sahaba that they became bald-headed later. I know the brothers were always worried about receding hairlines, but don't worry, inshallah, there are many companions that were bald-headed. The next thing I want to mention was the number of children that he had. And the reason I want to mention this is because I find, because I do nikahs and that side of things as well, and I find a lot of people, when it comes to marriage and starting a family, are actually really worried about having children, especially in our time where you get support by the government and people, mashallah, generally earning much better than they used to. It's interesting looking back at the Sahaba and seeing their family. So you can count the children with me as we go through. His eldest son was either called Abdullah or Abdurrahman, and his mother was Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wa radiyallahu anha. His second child was Abdullah al-Asghar, which gives an indication that his first child was probably called Abdullah as well. And Abdullah al-Asghar, his mother was Fakhita bint Ghazwan. His next children was Ammar, Khalid, Aban, Umar, and Maryam. And they were, their mother was Ammar bint Jundub, and she was from the Azd tribe. And then he had Walid, Sa'id, Sa'id, and their mother was Fatima bint al-Walid. And then he had Abdul Malik, and his mother was al-Banin bint Umayyah ibn Hassan, and some said Hussein. Then he had Aisha, Aban, Ammar, and their mother was Ramla bint Shayba ibn Rabi'a. And then he had Maryam, and her mother was Na'ila bint al-Farafisa. And actually, Na'ila, this wife, was with Uthman ibn Affan when he was murdered by the Khawarij. And actually, as they drew the sword to kill Uthman, she threw herself in front of him, and the sword hit and it chopped off her hand. And so she was wounded from this. And then they moved her out the way and they struck Uthman ibn Affan and they killed him. And it said that when his blood spilled, he was reading Quran at the time. When he was killed, he just sat there patiently reciting Quran, and his blood spilled, and some of his blood went onto the part of the ayah where it says, فَسَيَكْفِيكَهُمُ اللَّهُ, that indeed Allah will take care of them on your behalf. And then he had al-Banin, and her mother was al-Walad. Just to explain, al-Walad is a term that was given to a slave girl who had a child from her master, and the intention was that once she has a child from her master, then no one else from her ownership people can be intimate with her. And also they're not allowed to sell her to somebody else. And actually, once the master passes away, that she will be freed automatically. And the child is also born free. So you can see here that he had 17 children and 9 wives. Obviously not 9 wives at the same time, but over his lifespan. And obviously we didn't mention Kulthum, whom the Prophet she was the daughter of the Prophet and he married her to Uthman ibn Affan after Ruqayya passed away, and we'll come to that in a few moments. It's said that he died in the year 90, some said 95, 88 or 82 AH, and he was buried on a Saturday night in Baqi al-Gharqad. And that's interesting to note because obviously we're in finishing Rabi al-Awwal, and there's always discussions about Islamic dates and months and dates of birth and dates of passing away in Islam. And just from this case, you can see there's 4 different years where it's assumed that Uthman ibn Affan passed away. Some of these can be reconciled, especially the difference between the 90s and the 80s, because it depends when you're starting the counting of the year. Are you starting counting from prophethood, in which case there's 10 years of 13 years of Mecca, or are you counting from Hijrah, and so on. And so this is always why you can reconcile some dates in Islam when you see Islamic texts, and otherwise it's because people just really didn't count the years. Nobody really kept a track of which year it is ongoing, and so they wouldn't always know which year exactly he passed away. So there'd be different narrations as well. So here you can see he had 17 children and multiple wives, and both of these things in our times have really become sort of issues of discussion, and I'd like to say in some ways like taken as a negative, particularly having multiple children. You know, most families in the UK now will just have two, three, usually one or two children. To have three children is seen like, oh my God, you've ended your life. You know, you're gonna have no life left. You got three kids. You just, you know, as one comedian, he said, you know, you're just waiting to die now. That you've got these three kids that have taken over your life. Alhamdulillah, I have three daughters, and they're a huge blessing. They've been an immense blessing, especially during this whole lockdown. They got time to spend with them, and they keep us busy and entertained, and we enjoy raising them. And inshallah, we're expecting another one, inshallah, later, start of next year. And there's always this thing, you know, you've got so many kids now. Now you have to get a people carrier. Now you have to get, you know, Mercedes Vito and turn it into a 9-seater. But Uthman ibn Affan had 17 children, and he looked after all of them, and he provided for all of them. And so we shouldn't worry, you know, that you're going to have a child. How will you finance this child? How will you raise them, and so on? Inshallah, if you have children, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless you with the means to raise them and to look after them and to spend on them. For every single one of my children, when they've been born or when we've been expecting them, I've seen multiple increases in our income, in our peace and serenity at home, in our relationship between me and my spouse, and also our closeness to our children. So don't think that, you know, you have children and it's the end of the world and you lose your freedom. Especially young people, you know, they like to enjoy their late evenings, let's say, and they think, you know, having kids is gonna ruin their life. Kids don't ruin your life; they really bring a huge blessing to your life, and also a significant maturity and a different perspective. You're not living just for yourself to enjoy, you know, a burger at 2 in the morning. You're living to raise your kids, to make them happy, to educate them, to let them, you know, benefit themselves in the world. And inshallah, in the future, if they do well, hopefully they'll look after you as well. Inshallah, as the one who brought them up. But the focus is that the blessing of having children is in raising them and looking after them. And, you know, I personally, I always enjoy waking up at night, changing them and feeding them and so on. It's a huge blessing and a special time that you get to spend with your kids. So that's really important because I had a few phone calls recently where somebody whose nikah had done and the bride and the husband were expecting a child, and they were worried about, you know, their income. We've not got a job here. My visa status isn't settled and stuff. So, you know, we're thinking, should we seek an early? This was before, you know, the 40 days and before the 120 days. And so they were saying, should we seek like an abortion or seek an abortifacient for it? You know, we're worried about finances and stuff. I said to him, look, I've had 3 children. When I had my first, I was probably in like a student type scenario, even though I'd finished uni. But Allah blessed us, and things came through, and from the blessing of the child. So don't do it, inshallah. And alhamdulillah, they chose not to. And actually, she got a really good job. He got a really good job. They both got, you know, a permanent residence where they were staying, and it worked out really well for them. And they're so happy that they didn't go ahead with that. But these are real worries and real concerns that come to people, especially at that moment. You know, so and I also mentioned because every year we find cases of sisters who have become pregnant and so on, and they want to hide their pregnancy or hide the child from the family, that they're worried about their response, and you know they end up, the shaitan leads them to the craziest things. One was left in a plastic bag on a doorstep in a cold night, and actually the child passed away, and the night before the person who owned the house was able to come out and find it. One left the child in a bin. They just didn't know what to do, so the child was left in a bin. And when somebody came to clear out the bins, they saw this child in a plastic bag. You know, the most horrific things you can imagine. But what takes a sane, normal person to that point is that they do something wrong. Shaitan plays on their mind, tells them this is going to happen, that's going to happen, your family's going to do this and that, and they end up making the most disastrous decisions of their life. You imagine not only the sin of what they did to the child, but them remembering that moment throughout the rest of their life. You know, and you know, it's not easy to live a peaceful life after that once you've done something like that. And that is Shaitan's trick to to get you to do those crazy things. So it should also remind the brothers and sisters, if something happens, you made a mistake, you did something wrong, don't punish a child through it. And don't see your child as a burden on your life. They're not burdens as well, blesses us through them. Other things I wanted to mention about Uthmaan Ibn Affan, I think I'll just pick up on a few key incidences in his life. The first is, and probably what he's most famous for, was his generosity. And there's one occasion where that came out and shone more than any other example. And that was before the Prophet ﷺ went for the Battle of Tabuk. He came into the masjid and he asked people to donate for the army. Now, there's a few things you need to know about this. First of all, the Battle of Tabuk was taking place. The army was going to leave a few weeks before the crops would be ready for harvest. Now, obviously, we live in a very different economical and agricultural world where that doesn't even make sense to us. But let's just imagine for a second, all of your money that you get in a year, and you're all students, so you all get loans and all that stuff. But can you imagine all of that comes on one day in a year, or in like 1 week in a year, right? And you're asked to leave and go to do something a day before that comes. And if you're not there, you're not going to get it. So imagine this, big truck of rations is about to come up, and it gives you all the money and food and clothes you need for the year. And you're being asked to leave a few days before that truck arrives, and you're not going to be back in time. There's no way you're going to be back in time. You're going to miss it. So not only are you going to suffer now, you're going to suffer in the year to come because you have nothing. That is effectively what the Sahaba leaving for the Battle of Tabuk was like. They are leaving just before the harvest time. Some of the Sahaba, they work for those who own the fields, and the way they get paid is they get paid in grain, and they get some money, and that money basically lasts them till the next harvest, basically next year. That's their money for the year. Others, they own the harvest, and therefore they'll take that and they'll sell it and they'll eat from it and they'll use it and they'll gift it throughout the year to come. So them leaving right now basically means you've got very little means, or you don't see any way of surviving the next 12 months because there's no way of storing grain for more than 12 months. That grain is going to go old. So it's not like they had huge reserves that they could sit on. It's not like us where you get paid in currency and you can keep it and it's going to help you for a year ahead. There's no government furlough scheme and all this stuff that's going on. You just have the money that's from your harvest at that time. So that's really important to understand the context. So when the Prophet gets on the minbar, already the people that are there are at their poorest state because they're getting by on scraps that they have until this harvest comes. And when the harvest comes, they'll be able to eat properly again and they'll plan out and ration for the year ahead. So they're already on their minimum, right? Now the Prophet stands on the minbar and he asks who will give for the army to fight fi sabilillah. And nobody says anything. And Uthmaan Ibn Affaan stands up and he says, I will give 100 camels and their weapons and riding gear. So let me explain that. 100 camels. A camel probably costs, I don't know, somewhere between £4,000 to £5,000 at least. So he's giving 100 camels, right? That's like, I don't know, so we do the math, so like £50,000. That's more than that. £500,000 that he's just given like that. On top of that, he's giving the weapons. So that's a shield and a sword. Now, the way we know the value of this is when Ali radiallahu anhu was going to marry Fatima radiallahu anha, the mahr that he gave her was actually from the sale of his shield. And he sold his shield, I think it was for 500 dirham, and the equivalent today is about £5,000. So anyone asks you what's the mahr of Fatima, it's £5,000. There's no sunnah around it. There's no requirement to give that amount. The mahr, just as a side point, is whatever the two agree on, and is a considerable amount for the two of them. But that's what Ali radiallahu anhu gave. He sold his shield for £5,000, and equally a sword would also cost the same, about £5,000. So him giving a camel and a sword and shield, you're talking £15,000 per camel. On top of that, the riding gear, the saddle, and also the food that would be needed for the travel there and back. So you can add on a few more £1,000. So if each camel he's giving is probably the best part of £20,000 per camel. At times that by 100, you get to £200,000. Incredible. No, £200,000. What am I talking about? £2 million for each time he's giving. So the first time the Prophet stands there, he effectively gave £2 million. The Prophet says a second time, who will give for the sake of Allah? Everybody is silent because nobody's got anything to give. If people had something to give, they'd all be giving it. But nobody's got anything. It's just before harvest season. So Uthman Ibn Affan stands up. He says, O Messenger of Allah, I will give another 100 camels, their weapons and riding gear. So he's just given, within an instant, £4 million. The Prophet ﷺ then comes down some of the steps of the minbar and he says a third time, who will give for the sake of Allah? And Uthman ibn Affan says, O Messenger of Allah, I will give another 100 camels and their weapons and their riding gear. In another narration, the Prophet ﷺ then sat down on his minbar, on the lowest step, and he said to his companions, who will give? Now, Uthman ibn Affan hasn't got any more camels, weapons, or riding gear to give. So what does he do? He went back to his house, which was attached to the masjid. He went in and he would have pouches of gold and silver. That's how they would store it. That's effectively the wallets at that time. And they'd just keep it in their house. So he took some of the pouches and he came and he threw it at the feet of the Prophet ﷺ. You could say each of those pouches has at least got 40 to 100,000 pounds in that pouch in gold and silver in today's value. The Prophet ﷺ then says a second time, who will give? And again, nobody says anything. Uthman ibn Affan goes home, gets more pouches, and he gives them and throws them at the feet of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, Uthman ibn Affan, in monetary terms today, has probably given over £6 million in a single instance, right at the time that not only is everyone else at their poorest, but he is also at his poorest. His harvest is also going to get done. His businesses are also waiting for this harvesting season to thrive. And that's the point at which the Prophet waved his hand and he said, no matter what Uthman ibn Affan does after this day, it will not harm him, i.e. that he will enter paradise. And so you can see here the extreme generosity in extremely difficult circumstances. Not only is he giving a huge amount of wealth, but he's giving it when he himself is probably at his weakest point, and knowing that for the year ahead, he will also be at his financially weakest point. On top of that, with all the children that he has to look after, with his wives and X, Y, and Z that he also has to look after. Now, that's what it takes, to achieve doing something so incredible, so selfless, so extreme, that he received the extreme reward of being promised paradise, and that nothing that he did after that day would harm him from entering into Jannah. Now, as students, yourselves, and even as myself, as someone who I finished studies now many years ago, showing my age, but probably about 9 years ago, I think I was at Man Uni. But I remember that scenario where you're a student, or you start working, you're a graduate, or you're starting a family. Everyone's wealth goes up and down. There's no one who stays, supremely wealthy their whole life. Everyone is doing well at some points, not doing so well at other points. And one thing you should remember is your giving when you're wealthy and everything's going well is rewarded and valued. But your giving when you are at your weakest and you don't have as much to share, but still you share and you give to others, that has an even heavier weight and has an even heavier reward. So remember yourselves that don't think, paradise is just for those that give £6 million. He gives a huge amount of money in an extremely difficult scenario. But you yourselves think about what you can give on a regular basis, inshallah. Or even as a one-off, if you find someone who's really struggling, or you want to give to a cause or so on, remember it's to do with what your situation is at the time and what you're giving in relation to that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran that you will not believe حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, until you give to others from that which you love. And when you love it is when you really need it and you're looking forward to something, and you give to others, that's when you get the huge reward. That's when your iman and so on is shown before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so keep that in mind, inshallah, as you go ahead throughout your university and throughout in life, inshallah. Remember that giving is not the same at all times, and remaining and having this attitude of openness and sharing and willingness to give sadaqah is a huge benefit, is a huge rewarded characteristic. And it's not something that just happens at a moment. It's a characteristic that's developed over time. And one of the best forms of reward of sadaqah is to give a set amount periodically. And that might be to do with the way your income comes in. So if you earn money every couple of months or every few weeks or every few days, take a portion of that and give it for sadaqah. It doesn't have to be a huge amount, relative to whatever it is, relative to what you want to do. Take an amount and give it to others, whether you give it to close family members that might be struggling, whether in the UK or abroad, or you want to give it to a cause or to some program. Inshallah, it doesn't make a difference. The important part is that you get into a habit of giving. And therefore, even afterwards, later in life, inshallah, when you're all doing really well and you're set financially, you will have this habit of giving, and it won't feel like a chore. It won't feel like a challenge. It will be part of your natural life. It will be part of what you do on a daily basis, inshallah. I think there's a few other points that I can mention, but I know Isa said that there'll be lots of questions and things like that. So I think what I'll do is that maybe I'll pause. We can have some questions. If you have any questions about like the life of Uthman or things that he did, maybe that can spur on a whole other little talk, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Ustad, for that beneficial talk. I'm sure there are lots of reminders that I'm sure we could all use, from benefits of having children to the benefits of charity to the struggles that other people have faced. So we're now waiting for questions. I'm not sure if they're going to come up. I think there's there we go. They're being screenshot at the moment. So Ustad, can you read those?
Yeah, I think can you just scroll down on the first one, because my image is randomly in the way. Okay, is there any action are there any action points to help us become more charitable like Uthman ibn Affan? Yep, there is. So first thing is, every time you earn some money, take a portion of it and set that as a set amount. As Uthman said about the believers, الَّذِينَ فِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ مَعْلُومٌ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ, that the believers are those who have a set portion of their wealth that they give to the beggar or to the needy person. So similarly, you should have a set amount or percentage or whatever you want to do it that works for you and the way that you earn, that it becomes a habit then. So you can automate it from your account. I personally prefer that you take this as an action. Not shouldn't be something passive that you do. It should be something that you do with niyyah, with consciousness each time, and you give it to someone. And also with that, try to vary your type of giving. So sometimes giving water, sometimes assisting in a bigger project like a water well or a school or a masjid or something. You could also focus on giving on the spot. So if you see a homeless person or someone in need, giving to them, giving for education, giving for Islamic learning. So try and vary the types of sadaqah that you give as well, because each type of sadaqah has its own reward and own narrations of reward attached to it. So try and spread out your sadaqah into different formats, regular sadaqah jariyah, things that will build for you, sadaqah jariyah in knowledge, sadaqah jariyah in usage, like a masjid or something like that, inshallah. So try and build that into yourself. And then when a calamity happens, like this coronavirus, or some other disaster occurs, or some major need comes up, you won't find that characteristic of stinginess in you, because you're already used to giving as a part of your daily life. The second question: the parents' love for their children is unmatched. What goes wrong in someone's life? What goes wrong in someone's life, do you think, that they become so heartless as to throw away their child? So obviously, the example I was talking about was somebody who's just had a child. So we're not understanding that they're obviously raising the child, at some point they decide to abandon it. The point spoke about someone who has a child born from zina, and they're afraid of their family, what their family's going to say, what's going to happen to them, and so they just stay away from their parents, have the child, and then basically choose to abandon it, either giving it for orphanages, or in those worst scenarios, actually just abandoning them on the street or something like that. It's really there is an importance, and I don't want to downplay it, to people understanding the magnitude of certain sins, and some of that comes through understanding that your parents or people around you will be disappointed in you and upset at you if you did one of those. But at the same time, you have to remember that the child is an innocent child, and shouldn't bear this burden of you abandoning it. If you feel you don't want to look after a child, give it to a police station, somebody will look after it, or give it to an orphanage or something. Let the child live a life. Perhaps you'll change your mind. Don't even get to that scenario. Get married beforehand to the person you want to spend your life with, and then if you are blessed with a child, or someone grants you a child, even if it's through less legitimate means, don't leave it in this fate. Look after it. Remember that it may be one of your means of expiation and seeking forgiveness is through raising the child and bringing the child up, inshallah. So don't feel that you've done something wrong and there's no time to recover. That's exactly what Shaitan wants you to feel. Try and turn it around and say, okay, yes, I did something wrong. Plead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for your mistake, but then try to raise the child and correct what you did by raising the child well, inshallah. The next question: what are the main leadership traits during the Khilafah of Uthman anhu that we can try to implement in our leadership positions? That's a really good question. In fact, one of the defining characteristics of Uthman ibn Affan was to not fight with other Muslims. In fact, it was probably the decision that led to his death, or at least the build-up of the resistance to him. Ali radiallahu anhu asked Hassan and Hussein to stand outside Uthman's house and guard him because these Khawarij were coming to kill him. And Uthman ibn Affan told them that I don't want you to do that. I don't want any Muslim to be harmed on my behalf. And so he just sat in his house reciting Quran, chilled as ever, absolute legend, just, not interested. I'll recite my Quran, and lo and behold, they come, they slay his blood, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immortalizes it in our memories as his blood falling on the part of the ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of them for you. And indeed, he did. All of those who were from the Khawarij at that time met their demise in some of the most demeaning of ways. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took care of him. And I think in terms of leadership as well, that's an important characteristic. Is, pick your battles. When Uthman ibn Affan asked Zayd to compile the Quran, he went and did that, and he put it into a single mushaf, and 10 copies were made, and then they were sent out to the different parts of the Muslim world. There were some questions that came up to Uthman about the ordering of the verses and the ordering of the surahs and things like that. And he explained his position, and he also ordered that all of the other masahif outside of these 10 be burnt. And some people didn't understand what he was doing, didn't understand that this was a permissible thing. And so that actually spurred some of the rebellion. But he remained steadfast in that this is the right decision to take. And regardless of the opposition, he knew what he was doing was right. And that's what the Prophet said, that these are Khulafa al-Rashidin, that they were rightly guided. And therefore now we have a single script writing of the Mus'haf, which accommodates the 10 qira'at and so on. That's probably talk for a different time. But you can see that he picked his battles. He chose the most important things. And for him, the most important things were the betterment of the Muslims, the future expansion of Islam, the solidification of the deen through the preservation of the written Mus'haf as well as the oral recitation. And actually, that forbearance on, it doesn't matter what happens to me. What matters is the progression of Islam and the stabilization of the Muslim Khilafah and the leadership people around it, like Ali radiallahu anhu, Muawiyah, and so on. And actually, their debate and what happened after that came out to really a way of how do we resolve what the people did to Uthman ibn Affan. Some people said, they're hiding amongst the supporters of Ali, hand them over to us, and basically we'll execute them. And Ali said, well, make me the Khalifa, and then I have the authority to hand them over to you. And this, issue is what led to a major issues later on between them. But really, from Uthman ibn Affan's perspective, he didn't have personal politics. That is so starkly different to what we have with this this orange creature over in America. That he wants everything to hold on to leadership, anything to keep his name up, lying through his teeth, causing division. Uthman ibn Affan, if he wanted to, he had every right to go out and talk about how bad the Khawarij are, mention the narrations from the Prophet ﷺ about fighting them and destroying them, like Ad and Thamud were destroyed and so on. He had every right to do that, but he didn't. And it shows that he wasn't there for his personal benefit. He wasn't leader to keep his reign going forever. He never put into position the Umayyad dynasty or anything like that. He was seeking to rule for the betterment of the community. And I think any person who's in a position of leadership should see as that you are a steward of that position. You're there to benefit the people. And when you find that you're not able to benefit them, maybe you're too busy with other things, you're not able to focus enough. Maybe there's a problem and people are not wanting for you to resolve it. Or, other people are not happy with your leading. And you see there's benefit in somebody else coming and taking that on, then just let them go. Don't see yourselves as tied to any position you have. And really, I laugh sometimes because people take this serious, but these ISOCs, they're really there just for the sort of the welfare of students on campus, right? Being the ISOC president has no Islamic value or something like that. I remember there's this whole thing that came up ages ago about, can a sister be the ISOC president? And so people are, mentioning the ratio of the process of that. People will not prosper who are led by a female. And the hadith is talking about, nations and khilafas and things like that. And somebody's trying to talk about the ISOC in that way. Just see yourselves, you're just there to help the students on campus, whether you want to have a president or advisory group or whatever you want to talk about it. You're just really there to try and help Muslims on campus, give them a place to feel at home and to feel loved and cared for and people to talk to. And programs like this that inshallah they can learn more about their faith whilst they're at uni. But leadership and ISOCs is really just you don't overplay it. It's just don't take attachment to any of these things. If you can benefit everyone, great. But pick your battles the way you don't get so heated into arguments over little things about what events are going to go on and stuff like that. If you feel there's something beneficial for the Muslims, then great, go ahead. But don't sweat yourselves over it, inshallah. The next one, if a close family member has become very distant from Islam, what would you recommend doing to bring them closer to the deen? Okay, very good question. Actually, I get asked this a lot about for individuals. So let's talk about it first from us ourselves. What do we do if we are becoming distant from our religion? The first most important thing is to start praying. Forget everything else. It doesn't matter what you wear. It doesn't matter how long your facial hair is or what color your scarf is. It doesn't matter. The first and most important thing to do is to start praying. Pray, your Fajr, pray your Dhuhr, Asr, as much as you can. Build yourself to the point that you're praying your 5 daily salahs, just the fard elements. Just wake up, 2 rak'ah for Fajr, that's enough. 4 rak'ah for Isha, that's enough. 3 rak'ah for Maghrib, 4 for Dhuhr and Asr, that's enough. Get yourself to that point that you're doing that on a regular basis. Once you're doing that on a regular basis, now increase the length of that salah, recite a slightly longer surah, or repeat the surah multiple times to elongate the salah. Make dhikr after the salah, make dua after the salah, and so on. Once you're doing that, then add on the sunnahs, another 2 before you pray your for Fajr, and 4 before, and 2 after for Dhuhr, and then 2 after for Maghrib, and 2 after for Isha. These 12 rawatib, build yourself into it. The salah is the most important aspect in building a relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You'll find always if you meet someone that you used to see practicing and later they're not, you'll find what changed is they stop praying. Or they stop praying in the masjid, and then they stop praying at home, and they stop praying their sunnahs, they stop praying longer salahs, they stop making dhikr after salah, they stop making dua after salah, they shorten the salah they're praying, and then eventually they start combining the salahs, they started leaving times, they start delaying praying, they start missing the timing, and then eventually they're missing praying entire salahs and so on. So really the most important thing is the salah. It's what gives you strength, it's what gives you iman, and everything else builds upon it. Don't focus on anything else other than the salah. Just get them to learn how to pray and to go ahead and pray, inshallah. The next question, there's a saying that charity starts with those around you, i.e. family and friends, but how do you go about helping them when they don't admit needing help? So, in this scenario, there's always going to be family members that are struggling, that will speak to your parents, that will speak to someone else. They might not talk to you, maybe you're a young person, but they'll speak to your mum and dad and say, if you're able to help us, if you can, please. So speak to them and say, look, mum, I've got some money. I want to give it sadaqah. Do you know anyone? If she says, yeah, I know someone, you don't need to know who it is. Just give her the money and she'll give it to them, inshallah. Or if you know somebody else who says, I know some people that need sadaqah, it's a person you trust and it's gonna go to them, then inshallah give it to them. So it doesn't always have to be like they come and ask you and then you give it to them. No, they might tell your mum, they might tell your dad, particularly if they're family members, or if you can do something where you set up a pot of money as a family and people have access to it for when they are in need, or you have your own family charity, then that's the easiest, inshallah. The next one, you said regarding praying the tahajjud and other things, don't think of it as a massive deed. Please, can you elaborate? Yeah, what I'm saying here is like you need to tame your nafs. Obviously praying any salah has a huge reward. Any salah has a huge reward. Fasting one day has a huge reward. Reciting Quran, looking at the Mus'haf, reciting even one ayah has a huge reward. But don't let shaitan get the best of you and get you to a point where you say, oh, I'm a sheikh now and people are calling me and I'm giving talks and I'm the ISAC president or something like that. Don't get to a point where you think that your deeds are something to brag about. I see a lot of like fellow Muslims it's going to be a bit weird, but like on their Facebook profiles and stuff like that, and they're stood at the front of whatever and they're giving a talk and they're pointing and shouting, and this is like their self-projected image to the world. Everyone gives talks, man. It's nothing serious. So don't try to play down your deeds to yourself. I don't say you play it down to someone else and tell them they're nothing and try to demean them. But this is what you say to your own nafs. When shaitan comes to you and tries to tell you someone special, then you need to play it down to your own nafs, and that's what I'm saying. Obviously, pray tahajjud if you can, inshallah, and recite Quran regularly and so on. This is not to do with that. This is to do with taming your nafs and not thinking that you've achieved a high status, or you're set, or all you need to do now is pass away and you'll enter paradise. No, it's not like that. Even if you made Hajj, don't assume that the weight of the blessing of your eyesight and all the faculties that Allah has given you has now been repaid by you saying Alhamdulillah once, or by doing some salahs or giving some sadaqah. No, this is something for you to go on with. And just to exemplify that, Umar anhu, when he was later in his life, he was the Khalifa, and somebody said to him that, do you know Hudayfa ibn Yaman? He was told that by the Prophet the names of all of the munafiqeen. So Umar anhu went to him and said, yeah, Hudayfa, tell me, did the Prophet mention my name? And he said, I'm not going to tell you. He said, please tell me, I'm the Khalifa, or whatever, just tell me, did he mention my name? And he says, okay, I'll tell you that he didn't mention your name. And Umar was so relieved that he wasn't mentioned as one of the munafiqeen. I cannot explain to you in a sentence what an incredible figure Umar is in Islam. His numerous times he was promised paradise by the Prophet, numerous huge things he did to defend the Prophet, both physically and his honor and his legacy and message, and the number of things the Prophet said about him. For him to ignore all of that and to think that he was the person who could have been named, it shows you how you need to control shaitan, how you need to know what he's trying to do to attack you, and how to overcome it. The next question, how do you know if a calamity is a test or a punishment? You don't. You have no idea whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing you, punishing you, rewarding you. You really don't have a clue. So you need to just take it at face value. If it's something that upsets you, then we believe in the qadr of Allah and use that to satisfy ourselves that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of my affairs. Nothing I could have done would have stopped this from occurring. Don't feel that as Prophet, don't let the question of if come in from shaitan, because if is from shaitan, that if I had done this, then this person would have passed away. If I had done that, I wouldn't have lost my money. If I had done this, my business would have thrived, or all of that sort of stuff. Don't let that come in. What happened, qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's nothing you or anyone else could have done to stop it. At the same time, continue praying, continue giving sadaqah, continue being good, continue being kind to your family, even if they're not kind to you, and all of these things. And that is your, inshallah, way of passing a test. And if it's a form of punishment, then keep doing what you're supposed to do. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purify you through this time, whether illness and all these things come as a form of punishment or a test. This is only known by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What we know is if we fail that, then it was a punishment. And if we pass through it and we persevere, then it was a test, inshallah. But don't worry about whether it's a test or a punishment. You just stick to what's required of you, inshallah. Keep your head down. Stay on, the A game, praying salah, giving zakat, fasting, making dhikr, and so on. That's what you need to do. Don't worry about whether it's a test or a punishment. Next one, practical tips for not thinking that you're better than others. Tips for humility and keeping yourself grounded. So I would say, personally, I don't want to say too much, but I would say that you need to talk to yourself in that way and tame your own nafs. You can't let somebody else do that. Some of the earlier groups of Islam who are very big on khushu' and purification of the soul, they would go to some real strange lengths, like they would sit begging on a corner, and they would say, they don't know they needed money, but they were doing it to tame themselves. People look down at me that I'm a beggar. They won't see that I'm a scholar and have me in this grandeur and so on. So they would do things like, you don't need to do anything like that. Just talk to yourself, not to become insane, but tell yourself, your nafs, that when you think you're doing something good, put it into perspective. Assess it against the actions of Sahaba, against others. If you feel that, mashallah, you're earning really well, then think, what am I doing with my money? And ask yourself, have this consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you need to assess everything that's going on in your life against your hereafter. Is it bringing me closer to paradise? Is it bringing me closer to the fire? Is it being a source of reward for me? Is it going to be a source of punishment? And that's the way you keep yourself grounded. You don't need to do some of these previous techniques, inshallah. Just do it in a practical way, step by step. And really, it's all sort of in your head. It's what you think of yourself and what you assume others think of you as well. Can you explain why Uthman radiallahu anhu made Ibn Mas'ud destroy his copy of the Quran? Very good question. It's not actually historically known for a fact that he asked Uthman ibn Abdullah ibn Mas'ud to destroy his copy of the Mus'haf. It seems that potentially it was included in his request for everyone, particularly because Abdullah ibn Mas'ud used to, when he wrote his Mus'haf, he didn't write it as a Mus'haf. He wrote it as like his sort of religious text, you could say. And so in the margins and in the corners and other areas, he also wrote down some of the hadith. So in his Quran text, I would treat it as more as like his religious text of the Quran and hadith of Prophet ﷺ together. And so he didn't write it in the format of this is the Quran or this is what I'm going to share with other people. He wrote it personally. It was his own book. It was for his own benefit. It was his own, you could say, aid memoir. And it's a way for him to reflect on the ayat and the hadith. And also, so maybe he was also relating some hadith to certain ayat and making that, religious connection, something to ponder on, something to learn. But I don't know for a fact that he actually had to destroy his own copy of the Muslim.
Jazakallah khair for answering all those questions, Ustad. I'm sure we all immensely benefited. I know I did. And we really hope that you come back in the future, because we need Ustads like you answering all these questions that we seem to have popping up every week. And that's all for now, I guess. Everyone remember the oodles. You do the oodles offer you get for this 50% off on Oxford Road, not oodles noodles. And Jazakallah khair again, Ustad. And now we're just going to be going into breakout rooms, inshallah. And that's it for today. I hope everyone enjoyed Story Night, and now it's time for the link up part when it's on to.